technologically, and also military spending. And if you took the top 10 countries in the world besides the US, added up their entire defense budgets, it would be less than the US expenditure. So that's one of the big problems, is that the amount of resources that can be siphoned off as sort of a contingency, 10 or 20% contingency, out of US defense and intelligence and related spending is so large that by itself, our black budget eclipses the next largest country in the world's entire budget. Now, this means that it's very difficult. You know, some years ago, the Ministry of Defense of France was working with us on a CE5 initiative. You all know about the French connection. And we did an expedition to France. The cover story was a training for a group of 60 people out on this estate in Normandy. But you know, one of the senior Minister of Defense officials, Admiral Moran, was there with his assistant, and they had satellite systems and tracking systems set up. And we did the CE5, and they were I have a beautiful document from the French government committing to a long-term, forward-looking effort to make peaceful contact with these civilizations. And it's officially signed. You know, I released that a couple years ago. Those of you who haven't seen it, you should go to our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS disclosure.com, and you know, you have to navigate around, but it's up there. And there are a lot of countries. The problem is that the well-intending people in a few countries, even if they're fairly important G7 countries, have a very difficult time taking on this cabal of operations. Moreover, there are people inside those governments who will sabotage their efforts, and this is a big problem. So it needs to get, you know, corrected. It really needs some courageous leadership. Last month, I read at the end of that webinar, you may have seen, a draft address for a world leader to make addressing the public on this issue. I don't know if you all saw it. I'm going to release it soon. I was asked to write that for a point of contact I have to President Trump and a point of contact I have to President Putin of Russia. And there are people concerned at those levels, but they're really not in control. And I think that support, yes, moral support, certainly, tangible change coming from a governmental entity, I haven't seen it in 20-some years. So I do see that the public is awakening. I mean, it's a good thing that 100,000 people a day are seen unacknowledged. We're going to come out, the next big educational documentary we're going to do is going to be on close encounters of the fifth kind and higher states of consciousness. And there's something else that I can't talk about that's going to be a major, even larger event. So one of the things that we're trying to do is bypass government. Because, and it's not that I don't think government's important, I just think that it's extraordinarily dysfunctional and broken. And I think it's more likely that the people awakening to this and knowing what the truth is and then taking affirmative, positive steps, such as forming their own interplanetary contact teams through the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, using those protocols, which, you know, people who have just downloaded the app, called the ET Contact tool that we have, you can link to it from our website, on the iTunes store or wherever, have found that they can use those protocols and the remote viewing training that's in that app, go out and they have amazing contact experiences, having never been on one of these week-long expeditions with us. So I think that everyone can empower themselves to do that. As far as governments, what I do now when I have meetings with people in the government and the mainstream is sort of a service, because I feel they have a need to know and they should know. My expectations, however, are rather low that they're going to take the issue on, because they have to bite some very big hands. They have to bite the hands of the most powerful intelligence and military operations in the world that have lethal force. They have to bite the hands of the oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, public utility, macroeconomic, petrodollar, gangbankster system, which they're all nursing on. They're all sort of feeding off that system. Because when you come out with these technologies for peaceful use, you will terminate very quickly hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets. You'll have a new civilization. You'll end poverty, you'll end pollution, you'll have a new world. And if it's used peacefully, you'll have a world that is capable of interplanetary exploration peacefully. However, the stakeholders that are out there, and were out there 100 years ago with the J.P. Morgans and the Rockefellers and what have you, they're still out there. But they're, X generations later, but actually more powerful. The centralization of money and power isn't in the governments. It's in the private banking and corporate sector. To give you an idea, the derivatives involved with the trading of commodities alone on the Chicago Board of Trade and Futures is around $700 or $800 trillion a year. The U.S. federal budget's what, 4 or 5 trillion. Go do the math. Okay, so it's a complicated problem. And I have never met a world leader or a minister of defense or a head of an intelligence directorate or MI6 or minister of defense overseas or in this country who wants to try to take that on. Never mind a senator or a congressman. So I think that kind of leadership and courage and integrity has to come from you guys and from us. I think and it's not at all to dismiss government. It's just to say if they want to make themselves irrelevant, and they have, then they'll be irrelevant to the future. If they want to make themselves relevant, they can jump on board at any time. And someone had asked the question about Trump's Space Force. I think we talked about that a moment ago. How many ARVs have been created and so far in total on the face of the Earth or underground? And how many of those are privately or corporately owned, and how many are government owned? That's a good question. They number in the thousands. It's not just a few. They've gone through multiple generations of these man-made UFOs from the 50s to now. Pretty much every form and shape that an ET craft has taken, they've tried to replicate. Now, here's an important distinction. When you're up close and see one of these that are man-made, you're going to notice there are seams, rivets, sections, parts. The ET craft do not have those. They're seamless. And just a quick example of ET manufacturing. When we manufacture something, we dig something up out of the ground and then smelt the iron or the aluminum or whatever, and then make sheets of metal and rivet them together, blah, 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 right? No, that's not how an interstellar civilization manufactures. Which is why all these things about, they have to come to the Earth, because there's such things here they have to have. I'm going, oh yeah, right. You know nothing about transdimensional interstellar physics. So you're able to set up a standing wave, a resonant field, that is in the near astral, like a blueprint, like an architectural blueprint, and resonate it and materialize it, bring it into this dimension, all in a part. That's why they're seamless. And this is why one of the comical stories I like to tell is this captain of a naval contract vessel that was retrieving ICBMs that were being fired downrange in the South Atlantic contacted me years ago because they had one of these ET craft on radar at night, and they were able to triangulate it, and apparently their command center hit it with one of these electromagnetic weapons in, I believe, 1963. And the captain of this research vessel that ended up retrieving it the next day went in. He contacted me mainly to give me the information, but also he had another one of these questions that he had that he couldn't understand. And the ET was in a metallicized sort of uniform, and it was all one piece. And it didn't have any zippers or buttons or anything. And he was this old, crusty Navy guy. He says, what I don't understand, how in the world could he have gotten in and out of that? There's no way to get in it, no way to get out of it. He would have had to live in it all his life. I said, no, they set up an electromagnetic field, and it actually form fits, materializes around him, all in one piece, in a fraction of a second. And the uniform is in of itself also integrated into his bioelectric field and communication systems. So it's not just clothing, you know, made in a slave factory in Bangladesh, you know, bought by Banana Republic or whatever, sorry. But, you know, I think what you have to understand is that you're dealing with civilizations whose technologies are not what we're trying to anthropocentrically project on them. So there are thousands of, and they're not just in the US, they're in underground bases, underwater bases, Australia, UK, around the world, that are man-made. But they're not used all that much, but they've gone through a number of series of developments, but they're not at the level of refinement of a trans-dimensional interstellar spacecraft in terms of how they look, how they operate, how they feel. And it's an important thing for you to know, because if you're out doing, you know, a CE5 contact, you know, is it real or is it Memorex? Like the old commercial used to say, is it an ET craft or is it one of ours? Sometimes you don't know until you get a closer or more intimate event happen, like the ET resonantly forms in the circle with you or begins to speak. Yeah, actually, one of the ones that we photographed at Joshua Tree was actually speaking right outside the circle. There were 4 or 5 of them, but they were non-corporeal. You couldn't see any bodies, but you could hear them speaking. Everyone did, and we got quiet. And a friend of mine, Raven, took a photograph, and here's this ET, who I named Bijou. He told me his name was Bijou, from Andromeda, 2.5 million light years from here. Beautiful experience. And that then continued on the rest of the night with all manner of incredible intimate contact. So the man-made machines are going to look and feel like a machine. They're going to be invasive, and they're going to have structural parts. You can tell that they were manufactured together. But there are quite a few of them. I don't know if that clarified or not. I'm trying to use each question to go and share stuff that I think is important. There's a question here if I think that all or some abduction experiences are instigated by the military or the alphabet agencies. Yeah, let me be really clear about this. There are people who've had contact with ETs, and they may have been frightened or startled by it, and there are people who have been abducted by things that look alien that absolutely are being done by the intelligence community, and there's an area of overlap where people don't know what's going on because the stagecraft, the ability to hoax one versus the other is so good. Interestingly, when Stan Romanek, when we were at his house and he had this, he played this tape of someone who had called and left a message for him. Ricky was there, and there was someone who was trying to give him a heads up, and they were using a synthesized British-sounding voice. And this event that had happened, I think it was the next day or very recently after that, this person called using this computer-generated voice saying, "Stan, it was one of the fake ones." Well, he didn't know what a fake one meant. I said, well, it's a man-made one. So there are people who have had actual contact with ETs and have actual on-board experiences. That's how I got involved with this, from an event that happened with me when I was 18. And then there are people who have had very invasive events happen from the intelligence community and paramilitary operations that look 100% alien but aren't. And then sometimes you don't know which was which. So I'm not saying people haven't had contact at all. I'm just saying that you have to have this in your differential diagnosis, as we'd say in medicine. And one of my concerns is, you know, I was contacted years ago by the head of something called the Intruders Foundation that Bud Hopkins had. And the executive director called me up and he says, "Dr. Greer, you don't know how right you are. We have a lot of people in our group that have said they've been abducted. And in their memories, they see that the things that look like aliens are actually being commanded and directed by military personnel. But that's all being sanitized out of the reports to the public. On the other hand, people have had actual contact with ETs where it was a positive experience or a healing experience or an enlightenment, those we leave out totally. And there is this sampling skew, selective data cherry picking of stuff that has gone on in the abduction and UFO research community for 40 years or more. That's worrisome, because what that means is the public is only being presented with the stage-crafted disinformation part of the picture, and the rest gets taken out. I didn't believe it when I first heard it, and it turned out it was 100% true. So this is where I become very questioning of, when someone has an experience, I have to drill down on what part of it might have been actual ET, or was it something being done by these advanced systems, electromagnetic, mental, physical, trans-dimensional, that the intelligence community has. Because I know they have them, and I know they've deployed them many, 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 many times, probably thousands of times. The question always is, if you can't tell the difference, then what do you make of it? Then you just say, well, we don't know. You have to be agnostic. I mean, sometimes you don't know what the initiating source of the experience was. But you have to keep an open mind and try to get more data, more information, and try to get to the truth. I mean, after all, this is, science and also exploration. It's about finding the truth, wherever it leads you. Now, this particular truth has made me quite hated in the UFO subculture as sort of an apologist for the evil aliens. I'm going, well, I'm just trying to explain what's actually going on. All right. There's a question about, is there any insight on the release of new technologies and what the insiders are saying? I think that there are some people, as I mentioned, there's an initiative out of Salt Lake City that's a private corporation, equity research, that has a anti-grav. What's interesting to me is that is being, it's been intercepted by the intelligence community, who at this time are pretending to be friendly to it to support its disclosure as of a month or two ago. Now, what I don't know is if they're going to go through with it, and if they do, how it'll be spun. Because unfortunately, this system is not just a zero-point energy generating system, it's one that they've developed the capability of tapping into these interdimensional fields as well as life forms, and that I've been told is of interest for its psychological warfare value, to disclose that as what aliens are, and as distinct from trans-dimensional extraterrestrial biologicals that are from other star systems. And I think the question is, will that technology be disclosed for purposes that could be good for the human future, or will it be part of a counterintelligence initiative? That's what I'm investigating right now. But I do know it's been fast-tracked and approved. The last I heard, it was for disclosure. I understand here in Colorado, and end of April, early May, they had a week-long meeting with a lot of government and other people to discuss this, and the outcome of which is unknown. So I'm not sure where that's going. I'm hoping that they do not use it in the way that I have been told they intend to, which would be in the direction of really disinforming the public about this. We're always looking for people who have on their own figured out so-called zero-point or technologies. There are some that we're pursuing now up in Canada. So far, we've never found one that passes muster, both technologically but also strategically, meaning that they're willing to have it disclosed on a massive scale on an open source, non-intellectual property basis. What I mean by that is, if you go the IP route, intellectual property route, and the patenting route, it's going to get intercepted. You're going to get a national security order on it. If you go through the conventional funding mechanism, it's also going to be a takedown. There are about 1,000 ways these technologies get ensnared. And every single inventor and investor group that I know that's stepped into this space has fallen into one or more of those traps. So we have a very specific requirement that now if they need to be financially compensated, there are people that I'm working with who have that ability to do so very easily. And I don't want to, but it's, you know, substantial to get it clear to be an open source system. Open source meaning that it would be dumped on the internet, no secrecy, no patent, no intellectual property holdback, massively disclosed. So if someone had $100 million, $20 million could go to acquire and further develop the technology. 80 needs to go into the disclosure of it. So that every man, woman, and child with access to the internet on planet Earth, which is at least half the planet, would know about it. That has to happen, because if it's secret and it's small, it will vanish. And they always vanish. And the team will vanish as well. So we are pursuing that. Speaking personally, I try to avoid technologies that are not, if the holders of the technology, and particularly the money people, don't want to go through that strategic pathway, even if they're compensated, then I don't really want to even know about it, because they're going to all be assassinated. You know, the people who acquired Stan Meyer's material, we were trying to get it through my project, the Orion Project. A group that had more money than we had, because we only had a few $100,000, ended up acquiring it up in Michigan, an engineering group. A couple years later, I get a call from their chief funder, who is Lord so-and-so, I'm not going to say his name here, up in Great Britain. And he says, look, you know, they've gotten these things operational, including Stan Meyer's toroid. And he had a donut-shaped object that had a national security order on it. And that was the main thing we were wanting to get. And this group got it operational. And it was over Unity. It was putting out free energy. It had a kind of a liquefied, magnetically charged material in the center of this toroid. And Murder Incorporated came after them. And they were getting death threats and all kinds of problems, all kinds of WSFM, electromagnetic weapon systems. And their fantasy was that they were going to evacuate to an eco-friendly country. I said, you'd have to go to an eco-friendly planet. There is no country on this planet that these henchmen won't find you. So I wrote out a 3-page strategic thing they needed to do instantly to protect themselves and to protect the technology, that included a massive data dump into the internet and a press conference and getting it out of their own hands in a secretive corporate way. They wouldn't do it, and the last I heard, they've all been assassinated. They're all dead. So I've been through from 1991 to now probably dozens of these sort of initiatives. They've all ended in absolute mind-crushing, heartbreaking disasters. I won't do it anymore. It has to be someone who understands what they're up against. And most of the engineering people think, oh, I have a better mousetrap. The world will be the path to my door. No, Murder Incorporated is going to be the path to your door first. Or they think that, you know, I'm going to outwit the intelligence community. I was talking to a guy in Orange County. He had one of these. We're going to put it into 150 different patents, and they won't know what we have. I said, they know what you have already. I've already heard from people at the agency about what you're doing. You have? I said, well, of course. They monitor everything in real time. As soon as you have a device operating that taps into that field, the zero-point field or related, that's picked up by a satellite. The same as if you set off a nuclear weapon. They know what you have, when you have it, before you have it, or contemporaneously at the same time. I said, you're delusional if you think you're going to trick anyone in the unacknowledged special access project world that have these kinds of technologies and be off the radar. There was another guy up in Canada I met with a year ago, and he said, oh, well, we're going to put it in power plants in Africa, and nobody will know we have it. Oy vey. Where's a rock? I'm going to kill myself right now. You know, it's just like so completely ridiculous because they just don't understand strategically what they're up against. That And this is the Achilles heel of people who are brilliant engineers or even brilliant financiers. They think it's like coming out with a new version of an iPhone. No, it isn't. You're coming out with something that's going to terminate hundreds of trillions of dollars of oil, gas, coal, banking, petrodollar, et cetera, macroeconomic power. Not just money, power. Those folks are going to do everything within their ability to stop you. So you have a handful of petro-Nazis and gangbangsters who want this stopped, but you have 7.5 billion people who will be on your side. Give it to the people. So that's my message. There's a way to do it. It's a heavy lift, and even then it's dangerous. Now, frankly, I think that the first level of disclosure on those technologies needs to be a stationary, in other words, sit on your table here or sit up where your heat pump is. That would be an energy generating system. I think that the things that are teleportation or anti-grav and what have you that can be weaponized into a missile delivery system needs to be a second level of disclosure in terms of an applied technology, because obviously anything like that can be applied by anyone once they have the knowledge into a weapon delivery system. And that gets into this other big question of what are we going to do when we grow up as a people? You know, I mean, we're stuck in the 1800s paradigm with our energy and technology. Don't fool yourself with all your little computer gadgets. I mean, everything this planet is running on is circa 1800s, late 1800s. Oil, gas, coal, even nuclear is mid-1900s. So if we want to move on to a level 1 civilization, this has to come out, but it cannot come out if it's going to be used in a weaponized way. So we have to have an evolution of consciousness and the structures within society to have, let's call it an enforceable peace. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but where we maintain the world in a stable, peaceful state so that these technologies can be used safely to then transform the world from a place that's collapsing environmentally, but also in terms of the suffering and poverty on the planet, and can be transformed into a prosperous, abundant, stable environment, clean environment. And the earth, she is a conscious living being, and she will be able to heal herself very quickly if we stop abusing her. But we keep abusing her. And we have to lift the burden from the earth, and these sciences and technologies would do it. But it's not a step forward if we bring the technologies out and then they're applied to be put into a different and new weapon system. Now, in all honesty, that's what's already happened. Between 1940s and now, the most advanced of these technologies are in the absolute worst possible hands, many of them, and who are not being overseen by we the people or our government of we the people or by any accountable agency. And what that means is the people who are the holders and controllers of those systems, it's sort of checkmate. And this gets into a really deep problem. One of the things that happened when I was briefing the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff, Admiral Wilson, he was very upset about all of this. And he had made an inquiry into these projects prior to my meeting with him, and I did what's called a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon for him. And Astra Edgar Mitchell was with me and a few other people. I was teaching Edgar Mitchell about these things. And when I was in this briefing, at the end, I said, we really need your help, Admiral, in disclosing this information and getting these technologies under control and into folks like you, the white hats, which is most of the people in the military intelligence community are very good people, actually. But we need your help. And he says, well, what am I going to do? I've learned that there are groups that are denying me access, because he had tried to access one of these unacknowledged compartmented projects, and they said, sir, we will not read you into this, and hung up on him. He says, but they won't let me in, and the best thing I have that I know about is the B-2 stealth, and they have things that are 100 generations further along that are anti-grav and can do circles around my B-2 stealth. It's point, set, match. He says, I've been checkmated. number one. Number two, he said, who else have you met with who is being denied access like I am? I said, well, the current director of the CIA and the president and the Secretary of Defense, Cohen, and people like that. And he said, well, what the hell am I going to do? If I don't get an order from the civilian commanders, then I'm going rogue. How do I get control of that? And they won't give me the order because they're scared shitless. That's when I realized between 93 and 97, 98, we have to do this. So, and we have to bring out the sciences, the technologies, the information, and also be the ambassadors of peace to these civilizations. That's what has to happen. How do we protect ourselves from the technologies that are used to harm or deceive us? And how do we develop our highest consciousness? A great question. I like answering questions like this. I know they're sort of apocryphal, but people learn through stories. Back in '94, in July '94, I was asked to meet with Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, who was funding all the abduction cults in the United States. Because, as he worded it to me, he'd like us to go to World War III so that Jesus Christ would return. And, no, I'm quoting. So, yeah, I kid you not. Anyway, welcome to my world. Anyway, so, doing. So, zing, but that's the way my life is. I mean, yeah. Anybody want to make a movie? So, anyway, so, we have this many-hour meeting, and, he was trying to convince me to cross over to the dark side. I hate to sound like Star Wars, but, I said, I understand what's going on. And, but he was really trying to convince me, and he said, the reason that I fund these abduction groups is that I want people to hate the aliens so that we can make the case for Armageddon in World War III. Now these, of course, in Liechtenstein, the banking entities, of course, funded Hitler, and now there's a lot of money going into these programs. And I said, well, I don't really share that paradigm, worldview, but so we had, we agreed to disagree and what have you. But what happened that night is that I was at the St. Moritz Hotel on Central Park South, and my daughter was with one of my daughters. And I went to sleep, and there was an electromagnetic weapon system that targeted me. That said, oh yeah, you don't want to go into that area, we're going to hit you with one. So they attempted to abduct me. Now, the way a lot of these abductions are done is through what I call an astral body extraction, where they target you and then try to pull out your body, and then you'll have an experience thinking it was in your physical body, and you actually will have physical stigmata when you get back in it, because the astral body and the body of light actually manifest this one. This is what you've got to understand. Primacy is with consciousness and these subtle trans-dimensional, interdimensional realms that then manifest the 3D, not the other way around. So I knew this was happening. It was actually really terrifying. And I was like, oh. So what I did, I went in and I meditated, and I went into deep meditation and called on the power of God, as I understand, this supreme great being, and I transcended into sort of this beautiful cosmic consciousness state, and it stopped because the drop of my individuality became the ocean, and they can't grab the ocean, they can only grab the drop. Got it? So I said, this is the spirit warrior stuff I was talking about. That's the next workshop. It's going to be a whole afternoon of that. So I think what people have to understand is, yes, these systems are frightening and they are effective, but only if you don't understand the God-given gifts you have folded within you. And I love the quote that says, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. It's a rhetorical question. In other words, you're not just a little thing. You have the entirety of the cosmos and creation folded as a quantum conscious hologram in every single person. So as you go into higher states of consciousness and meditative practice, you begin to realize that that can be used in very practical ways, and that's how I kind of cut off that abduction attempt. Does that make sense? Does that help? Yeah.
Does that mean that you've got to be able to enter into an astral state?
No, you transcend beyond the astral, because they're operating on astral. So a quick trip through the cosmology. You have your physical body, you have your body of light, you have the essence, the thought form that is your individuality. Folded within all of that is, and permeating it, is the consciousness field. The consciousness field is non-local, infinite power, eternal, boundless. When you connect into that aspect of consciousness and quiet mind, you've transcended. The drop is now the ocean, and the power of the ocean is in your support. You're not isolating yourself in ego. So you have to go beyond even individuation or individuality. But that's the transcendent experience of the meditative state.
What did it feel like instantaneously when you first recognized that this was going to happen?
Well, you know, at first it just seems like you were awake, but you weren't aware of anything. It was just aware of awareness, pure consciousness. It's simple. It's very beautiful. When I died, and when I was 17, you may know this story, I was raised a devout atheist, and I had this experience where I died because I was very sick, and you know, it's a long story. I don't have time for it. But I had this experience of unity consciousness where the unboundedness of the cosmos and I were a singularity. And it was beautiful. But that caused me to search how to do it here. So I learned meditation. And the first time I meditated, bang, transcended. So I went to samadhi. So what that was that I had the pathway was open. Even though I was like this 17-year-old kid that was raised an atheist and in enormous poverty, and I was all that. But I realized, oh, well, everyone can do this. Now, my meditation teacher looked at me at the end of the 20-minute meditation and said, oh, you transcended. And of course, I was so naive. I said, oh, isn't that what we were supposed to do? I didn't understand you were supposed to make a geschrei about this and flagellate yourself for 50 years on a bed of nails in order to go into this state. But actually, it's incredibly simple. Extraordinarily simple. You just let go of yourself. And in this case, I was using a mantra and then just let go. And then I became aware of awareness and just only into that ocean of unbounded mind. So I got to where I could do this at will very easily. And that's what I train people now to do. Because when you're in that state, you're not really that vulnerable.
But at 17, you were thrown into it.
Yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason. I mean, well, I was a stupid jock who had an injury on my left thigh and bicycled 200 miles, and it spread this huge infection. And then I had hepatorenal syndrome and kidney failure, and I was so poor. I was in high school supporting myself in my own apartment, and I died. You know, because I couldn't go to a doctor. I was too poor to see a doctor, you know, because we don't have health care in this country. Speaking as a public emergency doctor. Anyway, so, you know, but luckily, you know, I survived. Well, no, I didn't want to come back. I was asked to. But that's a long story. Long story. So, you know, that's one of the things that you have to kind of understand, is that all these technologies, it's like a gnat flying in front of the sun. If you understand the sun is inside of each of you. So don't give it, that's what I said a while back, don't give this more power than it deserves. It doesn't deserve that much power. It is, in a sense, electromagnetic witchcraft and dark magic and dark use of energies. But the light is always a millionfold, infinitely greater than the dark. And if you stay connected to that, don't worry about it. It doesn't mean it won't be difficult. And there are experiences I've had that are very scary. And I've had a few near-death experiences. And you know the story back in the 90s where 3 people on my team, through these little warfare systems, got cancer the same month. I was one of them. You know, so... yeah, they can do some nasty stuff, but I survived. Unfortunately, 2 didn't. And then the wet works teams, you know, when we were going to get one of these technology systems from Bill Colby, the CIA director, they killed him, made it look like an accidental drowning. But the week we were going to meet with him, with a member of my board, they found him floating down the Potomac River, and that's when For years, I'd had people come to me and say, do you want protection? From the intelligence community who are on our side of this, the white hats. And I would say, no, I don't want to get involved in that spy versus spy stuff. Then I said, yes. So that's in place. So, someone crosses me at their great peril. And I won't even know about it.
When you were targeted through the weapons system, did you feel yourself about to pass out and see everything get fuzzy and feel, because I've also asked for protect, did you feel yourself physically come out of your body? Because I've also had a similar experience, and to protect myself, I also did just similar to what you have done, but it was way before I even was aware of who you were.
Yes, well, there are people who have natural out-of-body experiences that frighten them just because it's something unusual. And I'm talking about a specific electronic warfare system inducing it. In this case, I knew. It was a directional. I could even tell what direction from out of the window this was coming at me from. And I'm highly intuitive, sort of like a dog. If you look at it, a dog will have its back to you, and if you look at it, it'll feel and turn. I'm like that, sort of like a big dog. But I love animal dogs, by the way. That's a compliment. So it's something you definitely can do. And I think one of the important things to learn from these technologies is that they're all based, from what I said earlier, think about the Vedic siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S. Every single one of those capabilities are folded within you innately. And when you need them, and you practice consciousness development, they will be there for you. Now, they may not be there all the time, but I have had a couple of levitation experiences just because I didn't need it. It was just in a state and it spontaneously happened and I floated. So any of these experiences can come to you spontaneously as you practice meditation, experience higher states of consciousness, and learn the structure of the cosmos. And as you go into that journey, and it's not religious development, but it's spiritual development, which I make a distinction between the two, since they're usually 180 degrees opposite. Not always, but frequently. So religiosity and spirituality are usually 180 degrees opposites. The doctrine overruns the spiritual part. But at any rate, if you practice these, and from whatever tradition works for you, for me, it was the meditative state and the ancient Vedic knowledge in the cities. But then I began to realize that those were all not only mirrored in the extraterrestrial phenomenon of teleportation, bilocation, solid objects like here at Blanca Peak, a massive ET craft in broad daylight went straight into that mountain and didn't hit it because it was just slightly able to resonantly shift its field so solid matter can go straight through solid matter. Because you realize, most of this, quote, matter that makes up your body, if you took the space out of it, would fit on the tip of a needle, the tip of a pin. That's how much matter you are. The rest is this other energy field. So if you just took the matter and moved it a little bit out of spin or angular momentum with other solid systems, you could pass right through it, which is what a Vedic master does when he walks through a wall, right? Or an ET craft when it's shifted and goes straight into the earth or into the water and doesn't explode, because it's not, no atom of the one is touching the other. Does this make sense? So, but think about that. You have that ability built within you, within your hardware and your software of a human or of an ET. So all these technologies you can demystify them by understanding yourself and understanding your own spiritual capabilities and what the capabilities are in humanity. And the beauty of that is that then it's not so alien. It's actually very natural. But there is a sort of an educational discovery process to that has to do with understanding what the human potential is, which is enormous, beautiful.
Can higher civilizations protect us from, like, our sun, like a massive coronal mass ejection?
There was a question about any of these civilizations can protect us, if they wish, from anything. Here's the big problem, and I'm glad you asked this question. The reason I met with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency in late 90s, early 2000s, was to read him into these projects that he was being denied access to and give him a warning that our systems on Earth and in space had become so developed that they had become an existential threat to ET operations, and that the ETs for millions of years, and one or few civilizations for upwards of 1 billion years, have been guardians protecting life on Earth. But when we force them too far out of this dimension, then there are things out in space that could be very harmful to us, that could hit us. And it isn't to say that they couldn't then re-emerge, but at their own great peril. So we are putting the planet at risk for things that it has traditionally been protected from, that we have very little knowledge of, because we have weaponized these satellite systems in space and also ground-based systems that can reach. So what that means is these technologies in the wrong hands are, it's like, forgive them, they know not what they do. They don't even understand, some of these folks, how reckless and foolish the toys. It's sort of a Strangelovian level. Dr. Strangelove is my reference there. Strangelovian level of madness, like the mad scientists and mad people who are in their own little covert bubble. But there are consequences to doing this. And this is why I wanted to wrap up with a few simple points. The solutions are the disclosure and ethical oversight of these USAP technologies. Now that's a big one, is what we were just talking about. We have to reach a point where these systems and the technologies have an ethical and conscious and enlightened oversight. Without that, it is very dangerous. And that is why the Disclosure Project, why I founded it back in the 90s. Higher states of consciousness. By understanding and entering into these states of consciousness, not only can you know what they're doing, but you can protect yourself and the planet. Because people who come together in prayerful and meditative states have a morphogenic field effect that's enormously protective, beyond what you can imagine, even in the physical domain. This is why they've done studies with intercessionary prayer studies, where they found, people praying with a pure heart for someone who's 1,000 miles away. It has a very amazing effect. And so if people act together in a conscious and enlightened way, it really can put us off the course of destruction onto a path of enlightenment and universal peace. And this is why the next big program we're going to roll out is a global mass awareness of close encounters of the fifth kind. If you understand, I think one time it was called the Maharishi effect, because they'd send meditators into a city and they'd meditate and the crime rates would go down. It only took 1%. So if Denver has 2 million people, then you would need 20,000 people to go there. But what they found is that, and this is also true in physics, is that if you look at, in quantum physics, superfluidity and helium, it only takes about 1% of the molecules becoming coherent in that substrate, in the helium, as it approaches absolute zero. And when 1% is reached, the entire container takes on these magical properties that are, where all of them at once go bang, superfluid and coherent. They all align. So don't think that you have to get 99% of the public or 50.1. This is not an election. You need 1% who understand where we are, what the risks are, what the solutions are in consciousness and meditation, peaceful contact, and even these technological solutions moving together. Now, on Earth, that would be about 75 million people. We hope with this next documentary and educational program, we can reach about 100 million people to enter into meditative states together and contact states together, to show these civilizations another face to humanity, an enlightened, peaceful face that can then